So that plays into it. So usually, like, we know for certain if the defect affects like health and safety, it's automatically material. If it affects value, it would be material. But then again, how much does it affect value? You know, can you demonstrate that? Like, all these things come in.
Right. Okay, we are back, and during the break, we actually took a look to see whether or not investors were included in this new HST rebate, and it looks like they are. So do you want to touch on that and kind of clarify that?
Yeah, so we were talking in our last, I guess, episode about the new housing rebate, which is specific to primary residences for the buyer or an immediate family member. And we had sort of said, well, do investors benefit from the new regime? So they wouldn't benefit under that program. However, there is that separate program that we already have for investors, which is the new housing rental rebate program. And the government is looking to expand the amount recoverable under that program as well. But the important thing for investors to know is that it's dealt with entirely differently in terms of how the money is exchanged on closing. So for an investor, they pay the full HST on closing, and then post-closing, they apply to recover that amount. So previously, they could only recover typically $24,000 just based on Ontario prices. But now they may be able to recover, up to 13% to $1 million, same idea.
Okay.
But it's a much different financial calculation, because coming up with the 130,000, at the high end, is a different thing.
So essentially, the investor would have to buy that property at $1 million and then get the rebate after closing for the full 130,000. So that's what it looks like. That's what would happen.
They may not recover. Oh, yes, they would. Yeah. So sorry, I was thinking the other rebate was still involved, but it's not. Yeah. So for instance, we have investors prior to April 1st to buy new builds with the intention of creating a rental. So they would be bringing to us the $24,000 from their own resources, because that number is not factored into their mortgage calculation. So it's almost like an adjustment on closing. Now, it's going to be much harder to come up with $130,000 from your own resources. So I'm not sure how lenders are going to look at that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it's never been a situation where investors could wrap that into their financing, because it's not in the purchase price.
Well, I guess we're going to find out soon. We're going to find out soon. Okay, cool. But at least we know that there is something there.
There is a program that's incentivizing investment too.
Right. And I think it's just really, again, just to drive, sales and get the developers to start digging in. Okay, perfect. So I want to dive into now what buyers have to be aware of before they actually go firm.
Yeah.
So what are things that sellers have to disclose or not disclose?
Yeah.
Right. In their home.
I know. And we always have to have these conversations, unfortunately, usually with buyers after something has cropped up post-closing. And a lot of people assume that if something pops up post-closing, well, the seller's going to pay for it, or it was the seller's responsibility, or they're obligated to now remediate it.
You must see a ton of that.
Most of the time, not the case.
Yeah.
And I think that surprises a lot of people, and rightfully so. Like, I get where people are coming from. But the courts and the law historically have been pretty critical of buyers in terms of they are really expected to do their own due diligence. And in a lot of ways, they are taking the house as is to an extent. Even if you don't write as is in schedule, like, it's already there. It's in the law. So what that means in effect is that sellers typically are not really responsible for disclosing any discoverable defects with the property. So those are often called like patent defects. So if, for instance, there was some roof shingles missing, But you could have had an inspection of the property before you made your offer and firmed up, and your inspector would have gone on the roof and noticed that.
Mm-hmm. So
or drone. Yeah. Right? Oh yeah. We don't even need people to go on the roofs anymore. I'm old school. Yeah. So no, it's not the seller's responsibility. You could have figured that out before you made your offer and you didn't.
So something that they can see, they should have been able to see that.
That a normal home inspection or a normal amount of due diligence would have discovered, the seller is off the hook. Now, if the seller, there's a different category of defect, which is like a latent defect, which are not discoverable. Mm-hmm. So for instance, the basement gets water in it during a really hard rainfall, but the buyer was never there during a really hard rainfall. So they couldn't have figured that out. And there was no other evidence. So if the seller knew about it, if it is material, and if it is non-discoverable, then the seller should disclose it. Right. But the material is a big criteria as well, because, whether or not a defect is material is very subjective. Mm-hmm. So that plays into it. So usually, we know for certain if the defect affects health and safety, it's automatically material. If it affects value, it would be material. Mm-hmm. But then again, how much does it affect value? Can you demonstrate that? All these things come in.
Right.
And then if, does it affect your ability to use part of the home might make it material as well. So there's a lot of gray.
Now, what about there was something in the home, there was an issue, we fixed it.
Yeah.
We don't have to disclose it, do
gosh, no. Yeah. Okay. We get that question a lot. And I appreciate it because I feel like the sellers are really trying to make sure they're doing it right.
Okay.
And that's a great impulse.
Yeah.
But, we'll get the question, we had a roof leak 2 years ago, but we had a company come and repair it and we've never had a problem since. Do I need to tell potential buyers? And I say, absolutely not.
Right.
It's only if you know of a non-discoverable defect that hasn't been successfully remediated, then you should disclose it.
Okay.
And then we always want to talk in detail about, what is the defect and just sort of look at what their responsibilities are.
Right. Now, what about death? Death, of course. So what are the stigmas that they have to let the buyer know?
Those are way more gray than even the material defects. So there have been cases on that sort of, stigmatization of a property. Mm-hmm. But the expectation that the buyer do due diligence is still there. So if it was something that happened that is widely available on the internet, if you type in that address, then you should have figured it out before you bought the house.
Interesting.
Yeah. So because there has been, again, I'm not a litigation lawyer, so I don't, get super involved with that. But we try and stay a bit up to date. But there has been, stigmatization cases or things with neighborhood issues. But, sometimes it's decided, well, this was not a secret. This was common knowledge if you looked into it. Yeah.
There was a murder there.
Yeah. And there's also been, I think some comment or some opinion, maybe even not direct from case law, that, there's a difference between a natural death and a murder and, and things like that. It's very hard line to parse.
Mm-hmm. Because people die in their homes all the time where they don't want that, they know that their time is coming. They don't want to be at the hospital and they go home.
And does that really have an effect on market value, or is that just part of the human condition?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what about especially the market that we're in today, where let's say now the value of the home has come down, mm-hmm. the mortgage is higher than the value of your home. What happens there?
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've seen a number of those.
A fair number of short sales over the years and now. So as a seller, I think the most important thing for them to be cognizant of if they're needing to sell and they know that they're likely to have a short sale is you have to start talking to your lender right away. Okay. Don't wait until you have an offer below the amount of your mortgage to talk to your lender. Mm-hmm. Because what we typically want is to ensure that the lender is going to release the lien for the amount they're going to receive. So let's say I have a $600,000 mortgage, but I was only able to sell for $550,000. Mm-hmm. My lender may, if I had marketed the property, in a normal fashion, I had, multiple showings, hopefully, even more than one offer.
Yep.
And this is really just the market telling me what this house is worth. Then most of the time the lenders will work with it. So what that could look like is they'll say, well, we'll release the property so this sale can close. However, you still owe us $50,000 or whatever the shortfall is. We're not releasing you. We want all the money, but we know that if we interrupt the sale and then we have to now take the property and go under power of sale, there's going to potentially be even less money. So sometimes we'll work with it. And from a buyer perspective, it's probably good to check the title and see what's on the deed, and how much it was purchased for and all of those things. But
now, is that something that a realtor can do prior to it going firm?
Yeah. So I know the realtors, you have access to a different system, your like Geo Warehouse.
Yep.
Does that show?
It does.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think back in the days, what they would do on the ARIA forms, they actually had a form. It was like what was it now? Like a mortgage. I can't remember what it was called again, mortgage doc or mortgage form. Anyways, and you would go to your seller, they would fill it out, you would take it to the bank, and then the bank would then say, okay, this is their outstanding mortgage. But in this day and age, some people have second mortgages.
Yeah.
And so if that second mortgage now was with somebody like a private lender, that won't show up.
Oh, okay.
So yes, you're right. Realtors do have access through Geo Warehouse to be able to see if there is a second mortgage or other liens on the property to say, hey, look, this property is underwater.
Yeah.
Right.
And the tricky part is too, so that when the lenders register their mortgage, they often do what's called a collateral charge. So a collateral charge is where they register for much more sometimes than the actual mortgage.
Right.
And they love collateral charges because if in the future that homeowner comes to them and says, I'd like a line of credit because I want to do some work or another investment, they can sort of just park new products under that charge. So they don't have to redo the legal work, the registration, the title insurance. It's a much more cost-effective and quick solution. But it does mean that when we look at title to properties, sometimes we see these big mortgages, but really they only owe a small fraction of it. So, I would think the only sort of cautious approach would be if you see on title registration for mortgages that are close to or more than the purchase price, maybe that is a situation where you ask the seller for recent mortgage statements and say, we're still conditional on financing or whatever the conditions are. Can you tell us more about what's owed because we're concerned about a short sale?
Right. What about, say, a fire in a home? So let's say the home burns down. Now, the structure's still there. The insurance company comes in. You get all the right contractors. The city is aware of it. You get all the permits. They go back in there. They completely rebuild the home. Everything is perfectly fine. Does that still fall under the same thing where you don't have to disclose that?
Don't have to disclose? That doesn't sound like a disclosure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If everyone signed off on it and permits are closed, then there's no issue.
Yeah. The issue's fixed.
The issue's fixed.
Cities come in.
Yeah.
They've passed everything. It's engineers, architects, BCIN, whoever needs to be there, they've done it.
It's all done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Good to know. What about assignment clauses? People will put assignment clauses in there, and especially I work with quite a few investors over the years, and that's something that a lot of investors like to have in there, an assignment clause in case they have to assign it. But sometimes sellers do get a little, nervous about seeing that clause in there. Any concerns with an assignment clause in there?
Yeah. So if I was acting for a seller, my only concern about an assignment clause would be, does it release liability from the original purchaser? So if, let's say, someone was buying a house and now they needed to get another name added to title or a name switched out because of their financing. And so they ask the sellers to sign an amendment because they don't have an assignment clause where they get to do it automatically. So in that amendment, it would not release the original buyer. So the only real concern from a seller perspective, let's say they have an individual who is the buyer, like a real person. And then they have the clause saying they can assign at will, and then it will release the individual. And then let's say they assign it to a corporation that has no assets, and then they fail to close. Well, they no longer have any ties back to that person And what you can't sue a company that has no money. So if you have lost money on this failed transaction, you've sort of lost your footing.
So then you would have to write it in a way so that, yes, you can assign, but it doesn't release the
until
previous purchaser until after closing.
The real benefit to an assignment clause for an investor is, like you said, if they do end up reselling the contract, they don't have to ask the seller's permission to change the name because they do have that clause.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, stepping back just to a previous question there. So let's say there is a shortfall.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the order in regards to the lawyers getting paid, the realtors getting paid? Who else would there be? Maybe, the seller, obviously. Maybe, there'd be no money there for the seller.
Yeah,
but what is the order of everybody getting paid?
Yeah, we're low on the list.
Okay, me and you, or just you?
Well,
okay, fair enough.
So what we've seen in practice, so it's different if the homeowner is selling or the lender is selling. So if the lender is selling, it's under the power of sale, which has more rules in terms of, payouts to professionals. So in a power of sale, typically the realtor and the lawyer get paid in full. And
a power sale is for somebody listening who doesn't know what that is.
Yeah. So it means that the mortgage has gone enough into default and hasn't been rectified that the lender has taken possession of the property and they are selling it.
Right.
So they might be selling in a short
fall. And usually in that case as well, too, the owners have now left the home. It's vacant.
It's vacant.
Okay.
So that's one way you might see a shortfall is in a power of sale proceeding. The other way you would see a shortfall is in the homeowner is selling, but the bank is willing to cooperate. And that's where it gets a little dicier for the professional services because it's a negotiation at that point. Mm-hmm. There's no real rules. So really, we're saying to the lender, are you willing to release your lien? And so the lender might come back and say, I am, but I get first priority to all the money. No commission, no lawyers, me first. And if the money runs out before it gets to the rest of you, that's your problem. Otherwise, I won't release my lien and the sale can't go through. So it really depends on what position the lenders take.
So they can dictate if they want to or not.
Right, because they have control of title. And if the seller can't clear title, there is no sale. The whole thing falls apart.
Got it.
So because they have control of title, they can dictate because they do have the right to say, no, I won't allow this to proceed unless you pay me in full.
Okay.
So because they're in that position of power.
Okay. So now let's say there is a little bit of money there.
Yeah.
So now the lender gets all his money back. Who gets paid next?
Yeah. So typically like the commission that is held in trust, there's never really, I haven't seen a situation where there was money left and anyone tried to claw that back. And then for any money that is in trust with the lawyer's office, for instance, it might get paid out proportionally to everyone else who is owed. Like based on what they're owed.
So the listing agent and the co-op agent would get...
Well, everything just goes to the listing agent. So what they do from there, I don't know.
Got it.
So they would have to decide. So for like, it would be like a prorated payout.
Right.
So if you look at, okay, we have this much money out of 100%, the realtors were entitled to 60%, the lawyers were entitled to 40%. It doesn't make anybody whole, but you just sort of figure it out.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And then after real estate agents is then lawyer or no lawyers ahead of real estate agents?
No, they're just sort of in the mix typically. Like if there's a shortfall, like they would just proportionally get paid.
Okay.
Yeah. But no one would get paid in full.
Anybody else in there, is there? No, that's it.
Yeah. Not usually, because anyone else, like if there was tax arrears or anything, or water arrears, they take priority over both of us. So there is the risk in the short sale that the agent and lawyer are not getting paid from the sale proceeds.
Yep.
That doesn't mean that they don't still have a contract with the seller and the seller doesn't have the obligation to pay them. But it would just be like any other contract at that point where they would try, if the seller was not willing to pay voluntarily, they would try to have to enforce it through something like small claims court.
So what if I'm a contractor and I've come in now and I've done some work in your home and you didn't pay me and the life and money was really tight.
Yeah.
And I slap a lien on your property. I can just go ahead and slap a lien on your property.
Yes.
Okay. And you owe me $20,000. How do I get paid? Or where am I in that mix?
You're a secured creditor. So as long as, like you said, the liens are really easy to put on, but then they do have to perfect the lien, I believe is the legal term, to actually show that it's valid. So they have to show that they invoiced correctly, and they have to show that they're within the time limits for the lien and all of these kinds of things. So if a lien gets perfected, they almost become like another mortgage lender. So they would come ahead of any professional services.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So they get paid before the realtor?
Yes. Yeah, because they're secured.
Okay. And then who's the one who actually now then, what do you call it, perfects it? To ensure that it's a legitimate lien.
So again, I don't do these, but my understanding is once they file the lien, they have to then provide the documentation to show they were eligible for the lien to be perfected. And I believe that goes to the court.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So then the court then says, okay. And then now they can take that document and then give it to you, the lawyer, saying, hey, look, I have a legitimate lien. Well, it will just be
on title. So
so you're looking for something in the title that says this has been verified or legitimate.
So if the lien is still in the period where it hasn't had to go through that process yet, that's where it gets a little tricky. But if it has already gone through the process, so the lien has stayed on title for more than the 60 days or whatever it is, then we know, okay, this is definitely a thing, because they should come off title if they're not perfected in the right timeline. So if there is one that is not perfected, like sometimes the money has to be held in trust until it's either perfected or proven to be illegitimate. So there's like some things that have to happen there. But because they're secured on title, eventually, if they're true, they would have priority.
Got it. What about surveys? That's a big one. Yeah. You know, what have you seen with surveys?
They are not exchanged anymore.
They're not exchanged?
Yeah. So, we've had title insurance in Ontario since, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around there, I think. So prior to that, when you bought a house, you pretty much always got a survey because it was part of the due diligence. It was part of verifying the lot lines. It was part of all these things. And encroachments and all of that. But because title insurance came in and does protect against a lot of the things the survey used to be used to verify, having a survey as a purchaser is less important than it was in previous generations. Right. So because of that, if the seller doesn't possess a survey, like some of them just have them, which is nice. And the survey was not registered as like the verification of the lot lines with the land registry office, then usually like you know what the contracts say, only if in the seller's possession do they have to provide one. Right.
So, now, if that very important wording at the end, if in possession is not there, then they've got to now provide that
they've got
survey.
It. So
and a survey can be $2,500, $3,500 to get a new survey done.
They are not inexpensive. No. Which is why sellers don't want to provide them because it's a big upfront expense and you don't really get any benefit from it. Right. Every once in a while when we do our title search, we always look to see if there's anything registered. Usually what we see is called a subdivision plan. So it will show the lot size, but it will not show the location of the foundation on the lot. Right. So it's not the same as a survey if you're doing decks or fences or pools.
Yeah, very different.
Very different. Yeah. It serves a purpose and it's good for us on our side, but it's not as good for the homeowner.
Right.
So if you want to do something that needs a survey, like you want to put in that pool, you would likely have to get your own and then use that.
Got it. What about easements? I'm sure you see a lot of issues with easements as well too. And does title insurance cover easements depending on what type of easement it is?
So
or encroachment, I guess.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, like all insurance.
Okay,
it depends.
Yeah, here that's a good statement.
Yeah. So there's I would say a lot of properties at least have some sort of easement, especially if it's in a subdivision or in a city center. there's some sort of service being provided to that community that is going to have the ability to go on to most of the properties to deal with their infrastructure. So there might be telecommunication that's run at the front of the lawns in a new subdivision, for instance. So everybody has an easement for that telecommunications company. Those are so standard. And there might be, drainage ditches or, that kind of thing. And the municipality has an easement. It's way less common to see easements for different purposes. Like an example would be like a shared driveway. So neighbors have easements over some of each other's lot. So there was enough room to get a car through so you can park in your backyard. But usually those are pretty obvious by looking at the property. Like you can look at it and you can see. So the way the OREA contract is written, if it's one of the standard types of easements, even if it's discovered before the title search date, the buyer bought it. So if the buyer is specifically worried about a type of easement, like they just really don't want it, they should look into it before, do their own due diligence. But if you find out, after that a telecommunications company has a normal easement across your front lawn, it doesn't matter. You can't back out. But if you find out there is an atypical easement before the title search date, then the buyer may have the option to just not continue with the purchase. But that would very much be case by case. If they find out after closing there's an atypical easement, then it's much, much harder to deal with. So if they wanted to, for instance, make some sort of title insurance claim, they would have to be demonstrating that it goes to the root of title or it would have affected value and it was non-discoverable, which is always the kicker there.
Right. Are there any particular clauses that you wish all real estate agents would put into their purchase and sales agreement in the Schedule A, where you're like, if they just put this in, they would be safe and their clients would be safe?
Well, I mean, I think it's the clauses that I know all the realtors want in there, but sometimes the market does not let you put them in. So I'm sure every realtor who is helping a buyer wants to put in a condition for financing and inspection. Because they're protecting your buyer and they're making sure everyone is going to be happy and informed at the end of the transaction. So would I love to see that process was done in every deal that comes across my desk? Absolutely. However, I know that in some markets, if you are competing against multiple offers and you are the one with an inspection clause, you're not in the running anymore. So yes, I would love all of the due diligence clauses that could possibly be put into Schedule A to be there. But I know that sometimes it's just not possible.
Okay. Anything in particular besides home inspection, lawyer clause, financing clause?
I think those are the big ones.
The big ones, okay.
And the tricky part about the financing clause is that what I would love the lenders to do, but I have no control over this, is during that financing clause, if they're going to appraise the property, to do it then. But they don't do that. They will sometimes appraise right before closing. So you might have done your financial due diligence and gotten approved for that amount of mortgage, but then the lender comes back and says, well, now 2 weeks before closing, we've done an appraisal and we think it's worth less, so we're going to reduce your mortgage amount.
Right.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden the buyer is on the hook for $30,000, $40,000, whatever that amount is. It could be even a lot more.
Yeah.
Right?
So because I have seen that so many times, when I had to do my own, when I purchased a resale property that I knew the bank would probably appraise, I, begged them to do, they said they didn't need to do an in-person one. They were going to do that market comparison one they do virtually, like just comparing to previous sales. And I said, can you please do it during my clause for financing? And they said, okay, we have the time, we'll do it. So they did it and they confirmed that they agreed with the purchase price. They even sent me an email confirming it. So I had that comfort. But that is something I had to really sort of push for.
All right. Allison, listen, thank you so much for your time. Again, we're pretty much at the end here, but if anybody wants to learn more about you, your company, your services, how can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, we are everywhere that you would expect us. So we have a website, mcmurter.com. We are available by email, allison@mcmurter.com. We try and keep that simple. And then, of course, our office is online and you can find our phone and fax and address if you just want to come by.
Awesome. Allison, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
We'll do this again.
All right. Bye. Bye.